Okay, so the torrid pace that I was kind of on with putting videos up in this series may have slowed a little bit. My apologies, but recently I just started my new job, my new game writing job. I'm back in the world of game journalism, so because of that, obviously I've been really busy with it. So because of that, I might not be able to upload as crazy frequently as I have been, but rest assured, I will try to do as much as I can. Just don't be surprised if there's a layoff or two here or there. I'm already kind of crunching myself as it is, and sooner or later your boy's gonna need a break. Either way, I'm here now, and it's time to record another video. So, welcome back to I Want to Talk About, the series where I take a topic, I sit on camera, and I blabber about it. And it's the next video in the series within a series, so today, as you can tell from the title, I want to talk about my favorite games of 2004. You know how the series goes at this point. I start off with an intro where I talk about the year a little bit, what the gaming landscape looked like. I talk about some big games that I didn't play or don't have a deep enough opinion on, some snubs if you will. Games that just missed the cut of my two lists, the games that would typically be like a 7 out of 10 on my scale. The cream before the crop, games that I really enjoyed but I would give like an 8 or 9 out of 10 to, not quite a 10 out of 10, and then my proper best list of 10 out of 10 games. So, enough introducing, let's get to, well, introducing, because we're getting into the proper intro as we talk about 2004 and what it looked like in gaming. That sentence made grammatical sense, I promise. So, 2004, the year that Evo Moment 37 happened, and I bring that up just cuz. But no, 2004 was a year I was really looking forward to looking at in this series because 2004 in the gaming world is a year that a lot of people look at as perhaps one of the best years in gaming history, and there were a lot of games in this year that I really enjoyed as well. Obviously, many of them I didn't enjoy in 2004, I would come to play them much later on, but still, looking back, it was a pretty stacked year, and there were a lot of exciting things just going on in the world of gaming as a whole. As far as the main consoles and things like that, the PlayStation 2 was still going strong. Sales were a touch lighter, but it was still doing its thing. Obviously, it was leading the market by a pretty wide margin, and in 2004 that was helped by the release of the PS2 Slim model. This was not the first time Sony had released a smaller redesigned version of one of their consoles, but having a Slim model was a nice little incentive to get more people to buy a PS2 because it was cheaper, so why not? And on the PlayStation front, 2004 was the year that the PSP released in Japan, but I'm not going to be going into that too deep in this video. I'll save that for the 2005 video. Again, in this series, because I am American, I talk about what the American landscape looked like a lot. No disrespect to other countries, so I'm going to wait to talk about the PSP until its American release, which would have been 2005. But just have it be known that 2004 was pretty much the year that Sony really stepped foot in the handheld gaming space. More on that later, though. As far as Nintendo, the GameCube saw a bit of a leveling off in terms of its sales. Not quite a huge growth compared to 2003, which is unfortunate because the GameCube did have some pretty impressive games in 2004, some of which are among my personal favorites, but I think it probably helps that Nintendo first formally announced the Revolution in 2004, the next console that they were going to be putting out. And I know you guys already know what the next system is, so me saying the code name might be a little pointless, but still, this is what it was known as at the time. So some people might not have been that interested in the GameCube because they were getting into early next-gen mode. But while the GameCube was not doing the craziest business in 2004, one thing came along in 2004 for Nintendo that was absolutely massive. You guys already know what it is. We stepped into the next generation of handheld gaming with Nintendo with the release of the Nintendo DS in 2004. This thing is probably something a lot of you guys are looking at and going, oh my god, yes. And yeah, I can't pretend I'm not someone who doesn't have a lot of memories with the DS as a child. I mean, even as someone who, I'm not a huge handheld gamer now, and even as a kid, while I played my handhelds a lot, I didn't really beat a lot of handheld games. I played a lot of Nintendo DS back in the day. Obviously, this was going to be a big deal of a system because Nintendo pretty much had the stranglehold of all strangleholds on the handheld market, and out comes this thing, which at the time was weird to a lot of people because it had two screens instead of one, and it also had the bottom screen as a touch screen, which at the time, I don't know if that was the first video game console to have a touch screen, or rather handheld for that matter, but it was a pretty big deal because not many systems had really experimented with such a thing, and even fewer were experimenting with 2 screens at once. At the time, it was seen as a bit of a gimmick, and would you believe that there were people who thought the Nintendo DS was going to fail? Again, you might be surprised to know it, but as we talk about Nintendo more and more throughout the series, I'm probably going to be repeating those exact words. There have been many times, especially in the last decade or two, where Nintendo has put out a system and there were a crap ton of people who flocked out and said, this thing's gonna fail. And in some cases they were right, in some cases they couldn't have been more wrong, and the DS is one of those cases where they couldn't have been more wrong. But there was still a lot of pressure on this thing internally because even then Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi was quoted as saying, "If the DS succeeds, we will rise to heaven, but if it fails, we will sink to hell." Dark. But he pretty much said this in the wake of the weaker GameCube sales. Nintendo needed a bit of a boost, and boy did this thing give them a boost, because to this day, it is still the highest selling handheld system of all time, and it's only behind the PlayStation 2 among all systems as the highest selling of all time. Granted, of course, we'll see how the Switch does in terms of passing that, but still, this thing was a very huge deal, and it also was pretty important in terms of the landscape of gaming. First and foremost, like I said, it was the first experience people really had with touch-based technology in any format, and it was proof that touch-based screens could have a viable future. These days, that's something to take for granted because phones like this have touch screens and things like that, but with the DS, it was a pretty big deal. And at the time, the DS was a big breaking down doors moment for gaming that really influenced the growth of casual gaming, and especially mobile gaming. In fact, it's pretty much been said that the DS kind of laid the blueprint for what mobile games would go on to do. And a lot of the things that the mobile market would go on to do and the ways it would succeed can kind of be traced back to the DS. The DS had a really big appeal with a lot of people who hadn't really been gamers before. And it shouldn't be surprising that I'm saying that about a Nintendo platform, but yeah, the DS was a pretty big deal in that regard. It also should be said that the DS also was a big deal in that it brought a lot more girls into a medium that was largely male-dominated. Not to say that gaming isn't now, but at the time, there was a real feeling that gaming was a thing for boys and that video games were a male-dominated medium and industry, but the DS, about 44% of its users were girls, which was a pretty big deal at the time. So a lot of this combined really led to the DS becoming this big moment where gaming was starting to go outside of its typical audience, the target audience, let's say, and really establishing itself as a medium that could really be for anybody. And it wouldn't be the only Nintendo system during this era that would do that, but again, more on that later. With that said, don't expect me to talk about any DS games in this video, just because the early lineup of games that came out in 2004 was pretty light. There wasn't really much of anything that I personally played or could try to make a meal out of or talk about for a long time. But just know, this thing was super important, and we will talk about some DS games throughout the next few videos. As far as what was going on with Microsoft, Xbox had its one profitable quarter in 2004, largely because of one noteworthy game that we'll absolutely talk about later. A game that basically kind of served as the last hurrah for the OG Xbox. At the time, Microsoft was beginning its preparations for the next console generation, and we know that they would end up being the first to launch a 7th gen console. Again, we'll talk about that in the next video, but if nothing else, 2004 was one of the few years where it felt like the original Xbox gave people something to talk about. And that something to talk about was something utterly massive. Again, more on that later. Also, I know I don't usually talk about third parties specifically in these intros, but 2004 saw a pretty significant development on the third party front that I think had a big impact on gaming as a whole. 2004 was the year that EA made their exclusive deal with the NFL to make Madden the official football game of the NFL. I know sports game talk might be a bit boring for some, but with how huge of a series Madden was and continues to be, I feel like this was a pretty noteworthy deal at the time. Essentially, what happened and how it came to be was that Sega's NFL 2K series was taking some of the wind out of Madden's sales because it was, I believe, a little more affordable. And also, from what I understand, it was apparently a very good game. So EA came in and played hardball and decided to sign a deal that would make Madden the officially licensed game of the NFL, and by proxy, the only game that could actually use NFL teams and players. Back in the day, there were a lot of sports games that would kind of compete with each other or try to carve out their own lane, etc., etc. So this was one of the first times a developer or publisher basically said fuck it and took the rights for themselves, something other publishers of sports games would follow suit on much later. And it was pretty significant in that it showed how gaming was kind of growing as a medium. Suddenly, Madden was becoming such a big series that even an outlet as massive as the NFL wanted to get on board and make it an official tie-in game. And yeah, sure, we can talk till the cows come home about Madden and what it's become and yearly franchises as a whole, but at the time, this was a pretty huge deal. And just one of the many huge headlines that was made in the gaming world in 2004 beyond the games themselves. But what about those games? 2004 was a year of plenty of great games, including some that I didn't play. Matter of fact, while there were some great games that I really enjoyed in 2004, some of the year's biggest and most beloved games are games that I didn't really play. Looking through my list of snubs that I have here, I have Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which I don't really have to say much more. I mentioned this in the last few videos, but I don't have a deep history with Grand Theft Auto, so I can't really talk much about this game in particular. There was also Metal Gear Solid 3. Again, I've mentioned it in previous videos. I don't really play Metal Gear Solid, so I can't speak in too much depth about this game. 2004 saw the release of Half-Life 2, which was a huge deal. I've only gotten to play it a little bit though because I got it on Steam and I currently have a Mac and not a PC, so I can't play it on my Mac because since some of the recent updates, Mac is no longer compatible with 32-bit games. And yeah, I know, buy a Steam Deck, maybe one day, but not today. 2004 was also the year of Monster Hunter, which this game might not have been crazy big and significant at the time, at least not in a mainstream context, but it obviously would go on to be, and it would become a very huge franchise. And it was a big deal for online gaming as well, as far as I know. And speaking of online gaming, the last snub I have here, 2004 was the year of World of Warcraft, which obviously we know was a quantum leap forward for MMO games. A game so addicting that people actually had to go to rehab for it. And that still blows my mind to this day, because even as someone who's been obsessed with some video game franchises, woof. Again though, I'm not a huge MMO guy, so I don't have many memories with playing this. I have some memories sitting on my cousin's lap and watching them play it, but otherwise, I never really played it myself. Honestly, back in the day, I was more of a RuneScape player. Not really much. I don't remember doing much in the game, but yeah, when I was a kid, I played a little bit of RuneScape. So that was more of my jam. And as I mentioned in the 2003 video, Toontown Online, because come on, I was 6 in 2004. But anyway, enough about the games that I didn't play. Let's talk about games that I did play and really enjoyed. And again, there are going to be some games that just missed the cut of my list, some games that I considered a 7 out of 10, and I've got 2 listed here. The first one is Pikmin 2, which was a game that I know was kind of polarizing among the franchise. I think it's a game that brought some interesting changes to the Pikmin formula. It just was a little too overwhelming in its difficulty in some areas. I personally feel like Pikmin 4 took a lot of what this game was trying to do and just did it a lot better. Though it is still worth your time, it's still a pretty good game. And of course, it wouldn't be a video like this if I didn't bring up some licensed game. And 2004 was the year of a game that I enjoyed from a franchise that I don't follow whatsoever. That's Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. Compared to the first game, which I played through the HD collection, this was a much smoother fighting game than that, and one that I did quite enjoy, though it does still suffer from some repetitiousness, which holds it back from being a truly great game. That said, it's still pretty good and I do recommend it, even though with what we have today from Dragon Ball Z games, it's not the most essential experience ever. Which again, don't worry, even though I mentioned that I'm not a huge Dragon Ball fan, we will come back to Dragon Ball much later in this series. But for now, let's get into the first of the 2 lists, the cream before the crop. The games that I would personally consider to be an 8 or 9 out of 10. Not quite my all-time favorites, but still great games that I highly recommend you check out. And we've got 5 here, so let's jump right in. You probably noticed I'm wearing the Metroid shirt. Of course, I'm really excited to talk about some Metroid in this video, especially because it's been a minute since we got to talk in this series about 2D Metroid, and well, enjoy it now because it's going to be a while until we get to do it again. But yes, Metroid Zero Mission, the remake of the first Metroid game for the Game Boy Advance. When I ran through the Metroid series in 2021 and finally got to play it fully for the first time, I was originally going to play the first Metroid game in its original form on the NES, but my brother actually suggested to me that I grab Metroid Zero Mission because from what I had heard from him and from other sources, it was just a wholesale improvement over the original game. And quite frankly, I'm glad I took his advice because this is probably the best way to experience the original Metroid at this point. It's got the fantastic visual design, especially for a GBA game. The controls are better and even more smooth than the original games. Honestly, I think that this version makes the original game feel like molasses by comparison. The level design is big and very puzzle-focused, but not to an overwhelming degree. And there's a bevy of new content here that basically makes it the essential way to experience the original game. And if you are someone who prefers the original version, well, don't worry, because I know it sounds weird to call this a spoiler, but you can unlock the original version of Metroid in this game after you beat it. So it's not like it's not there. I always find it cool when a remake does that. It doesn't happen often, but it's cool when it does happen. This is the kind of game that I think begs for repeat playthroughs, much like pretty much any 2D Metroid game. And I feel like I need to give it one soon, because I've only ended up playing it once, and I really gotta get back into Metroid and play the 2D games again. They're super good, and this is definitely one of my favorites in the franchise. Okay, I know I'm a licensed game apologist, but spare me on this one. Spider-Man 2 is perhaps one of the most beloved licensed games of this era. Many of y'all probably love it too. Some of the games that I've mentioned you might be like, oh, really? That? But this is one that I feel like a lot of you guys probably really enjoy. I will admit that I honestly don't love it a crap ton more than the first Spider-Man movie game, but in and of itself, it's still obviously a great game. In a lot of ways, it felt like this was a huge step forward for open world gaming, and especially comic book based gaming, and I'd argue that it's a game I feel kind of planted some of the first seeds that would grow into some of the most popular superhero titles that we know of today. I don't want to sit here and tell you that the Batman Arkham series wouldn't exist without this, but I would at least say that some of the things Arkham ended up doing you can kind of trace back to a game like this. I think the changes to the web swinging are very fun. You don't just shoot a web into the sky and let it go wherever now. You actually can control it a little more realistically now. The massive open world is great to explore, and unlike the first game, you're no longer allergic to pavement. I don't think I mentioned this in my video on 2002 games when I talked about the first movie game, but in outdoor levels, if you fall too low, then you get a game over. You can't actually like walk on the ground as Spider-Man, but now you can. And again, when you have a world that's as fun to explore as the one in this game, that makes it even better. Sure, there are elements of it that can be frustrating, especially with some of the side quests, and many of you guys know which ones I'm talking about. I lost my balloon! But it's still a game I very much enjoy, and it's easy to see why it's become such a popular licensed game over the years. I'm sure many of you also have a lot of nostalgia with it, and yeah, it's still a very, very fun game, even with what we have from the Spider-Man franchise now. I could still recommend going back and playing this one. Hey, who cares if Reggie doesn't like this game? I sure do. This is gonna sound really wild, maybe to some people, but Donkey Konga was actually the reason that I wanted a GameCube back in the day. What? I was 6. And again, I am a musician, so I guess it shouldn't be surprising to hear me say that I was really looking forward to a rhythm game as a kid. In fact, I feel like this was probably one of the first steps into the world of me becoming a musician, so that's worth something, right? And even to this day, this is a game that I still think is stupidly fun, with a solidly diverse collection of songs, a good visual design, and plenty of personality as well. The rhythm gameplay is great, and the bongos actually work really well for the game. I think it's really clever and fun. And I think this is the kind of game that's even more fun to play if you have multiple people to play it with, or if you're up for the challenge, get multiple DK bongos and try playing multiplayer with yourself. What? Don't knock it till you try it. I will say I hate that it does the stupid thing that some rhythm games do where the songs on the highest difficulty are not unlocked from the start. In this game, you have to buy them. And grinding for enough coins to buy those songs is already stupidly long as it is. But all in all, the game is still a lot of fun, and I'll always have a huge fondness towards it, as well as the rest of the Donkey Konga series, which we'll talk about in the next video. You knew it was coming. I mentioned earlier that the original Xbox had its only profitable quarter in 2004, and this game was the reason why. Perhaps the most anticipated video game sequel of 2004, Halo 2 had a tough task in following up on such an innovative and boundary-breaking shooter, and what did it do? Live up to it. It retained a lot of the smoothness in the original game's gameplay with enough quality of life changes to satisfy. It was also pretty sweet getting to use the energy sword for the first time. The presentation, of course, was incredible, the music was phenomenal, and the story had something really cool going for it by allowing players to switch between Master Chief and the Covenant. So that was pretty awesome, and let's not forget that this game was a huge, and I mean huge, step forward for multiplayer gaming back in the day. I don't even think it's bold to say that this game was revolutionary for its multiplayer back in the day. In fact, it was a game that really set a lot of standards that would become commonplace in later online games, like online matchmaking, clans, and lobbies, all stuff that again is easy to take for granted today, but back in 2004, this was a huge deal. It was probably one of the big things that really sold a lot of people on Xbox Live back in the day. I may not have been able to live through it myself, let's say, but that multiplayer component was the crown jewel of the game, and perhaps even the crown jewel of the Xbox in general. And it was this game that really helped push gaming into blockbuster territory, given how massively hyped it was, and how much Microsoft paid to promote it, and it really helped set the stage for the growing world of esports gaming. And they even made condoms for it. Just in case you wanted to finish the fight, I guess. Okay, I'll see myself out now. But while I honestly don't feel like Halo 2 was a massive leaps and bounds improvement over the first game, it was a noticeable one, but not like a totally gigantic one, especially in the single-player component. It still did more than enough to jump ahead of the first game, and it nevertheless stands as one of the most important gaming moments of the 2000s. And again, like I said, I feel like this game deserves a lot of credit for really pushing gaming as a medium to be taken seriously alongside other art and entertainment mediums, in the mainstream marketing context especially. And it so happens to be a great game as well, and that's pretty important to note too. Once again, what would Xbox be without Halo? And lastly, in our cream before the crop, how about this? We actually get to talk about multiple Metroid games in one video. Get used to it, because there'll be some long gaps between other Metroid games throughout this series. But yes, Halo was not the only shooter that had to live up to a boundary-pushing predecessor in 2004. And as a matter of fact, Halo 2, Half-Life 2, and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes all came out in the span of a week. Talk about pressure. Given that Metroid Prime 1 is a damn near incomparable game, one of my all-time favorites, it was going to be a challenge for Prime 2 to overtake that, and as it turns out, it didn't. But what it did do was come out as a very good game. I think the dark, brooding atmosphere is still a wonder to behold here. The story still succeeds thanks to the show-don't-tell approach that Metroid is well known for. And beyond the core gameplay elements remaining so strong, I think the addition of the light and dark ether travel between dimensions made the game's wild locales even more wild and unique to explore, while adding an interesting sense of urgency to the game as well. Though I will admit that yes, the difficulty is jacked just a little too high, and I think the late game backtracking was a bit of a pain to deal with, even more so than Metroid Prime 1. But all in all, Metroid Prime 2 was another great entry in the series, and another fine showing of Retro Studios' development talents and ability to take risks and make them pay off. Here's hoping that talk of a Switch remaster comes true. But now we're into the proper best list for 2004, the games that I would give a 10 out of 10 to, that are among some of my all-time favorites, and we've got 3 to talk about in this video. So given how long this video's been, let's not waste any more time, let's just jump right in. Starting in at number 3. I've been talking about this franchise quite a bit throughout the first few videos, and you had to know it was going to end up making a best list sooner or later. The number 3 spot, I'd have to give it to Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. Like I said, you had to know this franchise was going to end up on my best list at some point, and don't worry, there's plenty more where this one came from. I love this series, so I will be talking about it plenty, and there will be several games that will end up making my best lists. Once more, it's wild to me how Insomniac was able to jam so much into Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, despite the fact that it came out just a year after Going Commando. And not only that, but this game did have to be notably rushed out the door and scaled back from what Insomniac wanted to do to accommodate for the new multiplayer that was added to the game. To think that they shipped what I would consider to be the best game in the original trilogy in these conditions is honestly pretty unreal. To me, Up Your Arsenal features some of the best worlds in the series, even to this day with so many sequels to follow. And even though the platforming elements of the game are downplayed just a little bit for the sake of the combat, I don't think that's a bad thing, because said combat, most notably the weaponry, is also among some of the best stuff that the series has produced. And the overall improvements in quality of life updates to this game make it a treat to play to this day. Sadly, I never got to try out the multiplayer, but I presume it was a pretty fun addition, especially for a genre that was probably going to be pretty challenging to translate into an online multiplayer game. This is another game that reminds me of why I love Insomniac so much, their ability to just polish and continue to make great experiences with their franchises. And trust and believe, the series would still get even better from here. Ratchet and Clank is an awesome franchise, and this is definitely one of the high watermarks of the series. At number 2, pretty fitting that I'm going to be talking about this game because the remake is coming out soon. As the time that I'm filming this video, it's not out yet, but by the time the video goes up, chances are you might already be playing it. But yes, my number 2 spot for 2004, I gotta give it to Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. I've talked about this game in several videos between this sub-series and several other videos that I've done. You had to know it was going to show up on this list. Some of you might even be surprised that it's not at my number 1 spot. Again, we will get to that in due time, and when I tell you what the number 1 is, you probably won't be surprised. But even if this is not at my top spot, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is by far the best entry in the Paper Mario series in my opinion, and it's a truly special game. The turn-based combat remains a high point this time around, even as someone who's not usually into turn-based games, and it feels like compared to the first one, this game affords you a greater amount of creativity in how you tackle the combat and the things you can do within combat interactions. And the unique locales and overall level design truly stand out in this game. I myself am a huge Glitzville lover. The boss fights are epic in scale with enough challenge to where they're satisfying when you do defeat them. The visuals and music truly pop in a massive, incredible way. The story is filled with whimsy and amazing characters, and I appreciate how this game actually used the paper part of the Paper Mario title a little bit more than the first game did. This game is obviously a sacred cow among Nintendo fans for a good reason, and while I'm not personally a hater of the games that would follow in the series, even though they're not all my cup of tea, it does kind of feel like this is the kind of game Nintendo is going to have a hard time topping. And I say that meaning no disrespect to the sequels that have followed it. I know there are a lot of people that really hate some of them. I don't hate them, I just couldn't get into all of them, with one exception that we'll get into a little bit later. But either way, yes, this is still the peak of the series, and as of the time of the filming, the remake, like I said, is not out yet. It's coming out, I believe, on Thursday or Friday of this coming week. But rest assured that I am absolutely pumped to play it. I can't wait to replay this game. I love it so much, and I can't wait to see how well Nintendo handles it on the Switch. But as much as I love Thousand Year Door, there is one game that topped them all in 2004, and again, it's in a franchise that's truly special to me. It's probably not going to be much of a surprise to see me put this here, but my favorite game of 2004 couldn't be anything other than Sly 2 Band of Thieves. Not even Thousand Year Door, there was truly nothing else that could have gone at the number 1 spot than this game for me. I mentioned in the 2002 video how Sly Cooper is one of my own most important video game franchises and one that's incredibly special to me, and Sly 2 is, in my opinion, the peak of the series. And I'm probably not the only one who thinks that, but yeah, Sly 2 is by far my favorite in the franchise. Even though it came just 2 years after the first game, Sly 2 served as an unbelievable growth from the first entry, where that game took on more of a linear approach akin to something like Crash Bandicoot, or at least I was noticing some Crash Bandicoot comparisons in some of the main levels. Sly 2 took some cues from the massive popularity of something like Grand Theft Auto, with an open world of its own. Plus, where the first game only let you play as Sly, with a couple other weird mini games thrown in here, this game actually allows you to play as the entire Cooper gang, which is great, and they're all fun in their own different ways. The open world also allowed the game to take better advantage of Sly's thieving nature, and the heist feature here are some of the most thrilling that the series has to offer. Combine this with a ton of polished, excellent visuals, and some of the franchise's best villains. I honestly think, even though I've enjoyed the game since this, the Claw Gang is still one of the peak villain gangs of Sly Cooper, and I feel like the next few games' villains don't quite reach as high. But combine all the great things that I just mentioned together, the polish, the visuals, the new gameplay styles, the excellent villains, and you've got a real winner of a game. It's definitely a huge favorite of mine, and a game that's had a huge impact on me as a gamer, and I think it's a game that everyone should experience. I really wish that the Sly franchise was more popular than it was and more people played it. And I wish Sony would remember this franchise existed every once in a while. Shame that they want to do everything but make a new Sly Cooper game. But if nothing else, at least the games that we do have are excellent. And if you haven't played them, I highly recommend them. Whew, what a year. 2004 had a lot of banger games. It was a pretty awesome year for the world of gaming. And 2005 is going to be another fun one to look at. Maybe not quite as many 10 out of 10 games, but a lot of overall great games to talk about that I really enjoyed. And yeah, that's going to be a fun year to talk about too. Of course, this video is just my opinion. What did you guys think of 2004 as a year in gaming? What were some of your favorite games? What were some of your favorite gaming memories from 2004? What are some other games that maybe I didn't mention that you really enjoyed from 2004? Because again, I left it pretty wide open. I'm sure there are other games that came out that are probably your favorites that I didn't mention. And obviously, I tend to end these videos with a question of some kind. And since I talked a lot in this video about the Nintendo DS, what are some of your favorite Nintendo DS memories? And did you have a Nintendo DS when it first came out? What are some of your favorite Nintendo DS games? Like I said, your favorite memories. Do you have memories from the launch period? What was your reaction when you saw the DS for the first time? All that stuff. Let me know your thoughts and experiences down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And like I said, next time we meet, we will be talking about 2005 as a year in gaming, which is going to be a fun one to follow, but I need a minute. I've been working on stuff all day and I truly need a break right now. You won't see it in the final video, but this video's raw footage is at about 42 minutes right now. So yeah, I'm gonna give myself a minute to go rest up and relax because I could use it. So stay tuned for the next video, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed and I will see you in the next video. Peace.